Hi, everyone. I'm Kyle Dyer, and welcome to Colorado Inside Out on this Friday, January 19th. It's the last weekend of the National Western Stock Show, and as tradition serves, we had some freezing stock show weather this week here in Denver, but our panel is thawed out and ready to go. So let me say welcome to Patty Calhoun, founder and editor of Westward, Krista Kafer, columnist with the Denver Post, Eric Sondermann, columnist for Colorado Politics and the Colorado Springs and Denver Gazettes, and also Pennfield Tate, attorney with his law firm here in Denver, but also former Colorado House rep and Colorado State rep. Let's start off in Denver, which is in a quagmire with the continuous flow of migrants into the city, the realities that the cost will affect the budget and how the city operates. And in a few weeks, the city is going to go back to kicking migrants, including some families, out of the shelters, Patty, if they've stayed past their allotted time.
Well, and let's be specific. The time is 14 days for a single man or individual, and it's elevated from 37 to 41 days for families. So that is a fair amount of time if the goal is to get them out and into a realistic housing situation. You know, on Thursday, Mike Johnston was in D.C. with members of the Colorado delegation, Senators Hickenlooper and Bennett, Brittany Peterson, and they were talking about the problems with the migrant influx here in Colorado. Denver has seen, almost 5 times as many as most inland cities. It's just extraordinary, and fortunately, Mike Johnston was geared up at least to deal with homeless, so he knows what the assets are for shelter. But this has just aggravated it so much. Over 37,000 migrants have come in. Many have moved on, but there were still 5,000 migrants that needed shelter during those very, very cold days. And now what they really need is work. So I would like to see Jared Polis step up, who didn't talk about it in the State of the State, and challenge the federal government too, and say, we are going to allow these people to work in Colorado legally within the next month if you don't do anything. These people want to work, and that makes a big difference because Colorado has jobs for them.
Mm-hmm. Krista?
Well, when it comes to stepping up, we really need to see Congress step up, because right now they've got a deal that they'd like to do, but I guess the far right and the far left don't particularly like it, where there's funding for Ukraine. There's also some changes in the rules about how we deal with the border. So tightening those rules up are important. I know there are incentives on both the far left and the far right to say no to those changes, and to say, oh, we're just going to deal with the status quo because it suits our political purposes. But we really need our members of Congress in Colorado to step up and make those changes. I also think they need to revisit the Remain in Mexico policy, because if you think about it, yeah, that does burden Mexico more, but it's warmer there. No one's going to get frostbite waiting for their asylee application if they're in Mexico. Here, all bets are off.
I divide this issue sort of into the macro and the micro. On the micro level, these are individuals, and yes, not all are asylees, and you should be here legally at the end of the day. But these are people with stories who have endured incredible hardship to get here. They deserve our compassion. They deserve more than our compassion. They deserve whatever we can do for them. But that's on a micro level. They're individual stories. On a macro level, a country needs to enforce its borders. A country needs to have control of its borders. The hard right wants this issue. They prefer to have the issue than a solution because they think it works to their benefit come November. And the hard left, there are elements of that left that really don't believe in borders. They think they somehow violate social justice. They think our carrying capacity is unlimited, that our checkbook is unlimited, and that these people will also change the political dynamics of this country over the long haul. It is time for some common sense middle to speak up and come to some kind of a solution here, because the status quo is unsustainable.
It is unsustainable. Ken?
You know, I agree with much of what's been said. The micro is a consequence of the failure of the macro, to use some of the terminology. My grandpa was an immigrant. He was what they called a permanent resident alien. He immigrated to the U.S. to go to college and married, raised family, ran a business, and stayed here the rest of his life. And 3 of his sons served in the U.S. military. So we've always had immigrants come into this country. For a long time, we had a system to accommodate that. The political vitriol now has destroyed the ability to have a coherent system to have an orderly way to have people come into the country, work in the country, and stay in the country. Immigration is inevitable and unavoidable because with the birth rate here in the U.S., we need people to come here to work. At the end of the day, we need the macro fix to address the micro problem because they're people. We've got to help people survive.
Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to say one other thing, which is right now city departments are looking at a 10 to 15% cut in order to afford the migrant services. So what we don't want is Denver, which has always been a compassionate city, to suddenly have its residents worried about cutbacks in city service because we're helping them.
And that exacerbates the vitriol at the political level, and it's illegitimate. If you're a resident and a taxpayer and your services get reduced because the city's got to spend, $180 million to deal with the immigrant crisis, I think you have a legitimate beef to be concerned. It's not an answer, but it's a legitimate beef that you get to voice.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It was a short week for the 2024 Colorado legislature because of Monday's Martin Luther King Jr. holiday and then the cold weather Tuesday. Krista, let's talk about how things are going for our lawmakers.
I would love it for it to be a short week every week. And in fact, how about a short term? You know what, I'm thinking, give them a couple of days and let's just wrap this up. I'm looking at a list of things like let's get rid of or reduce our Tabor refunds, essentially raise taxes. That's in order. Let's mandate that schools call kids not by their real name, but by their preferred name, even if the parent doesn't want that. We've got legislation again to have heroin injection sites, people to use illegal drugs. I realize that it's done out of goodwill, a desire to mitigate risk and ensure that people have at their disposal Narcan and other things should they overdose. But we also have to think about the people who live in that area, and we also have to think about the line between helping and enabling. And I'm concerned that if we're allowing legalized drugs, we are actually empowering the addiction, we are empowering the drug dealer, and we are hurting the individual who really needs to give that substance up.
Eric, your thoughts?
Well, there's enough heat and fire around the state capitol that one would think they could have managed to perhaps work even when it was a frigid day outside. Krista nailed some of the lowlights. I would add to that the fact that there's yet to be a censure of Elizabeth Epps for her conduct back during the special session in November. Yes, Speaker Julie McCluskey sent her a strong letter of reprimand. But I got to say, if the shoe was on the other foot and that was a Republican legislator who behaved as Elizabeth Epps did, the Democrats would not settle for a letter of reprimand. They would want something stronger. In addition to what Krista cited, there is a bill to make it possible for felons to change their name and change their listing by gender within the correction system. We can debate the merits of that, whether that rises to the top of the state's critical list of priorities. You can color me dubious. And then I would just get back to our previous issue of migrants. Where's our governor been on this issue? This is a crisis throughout the state. It is not just Denver. You've read the stories out of Carbondale. Our governor has been missing in action on this issue. If he would be half as focused on this issue as he has been on wolves, we would be all a lot better off.
Mm-hmm. Ken.
You know, when I served, my constituents used to ask me, how are things going at the legislature? And I'd always say, some days are better than others. But what I could almost without exception say is it was extremely rare where someone was personally, another elected member, rude or offensive in dealing with me. What really bothers me is the loss of civility. And the loss of civility on both the federal level and the local level, what it does is it impedes your ability to deal with substantive issues because everybody gets personally offended, they get pissed off, they run to their corners, and then they start throwing stuff at each other, and then it just descends into chaos. When I was in the minority in the House, we would argue things on the issue. I used to say we won every argument, we just lost every vote because of the numbers. But we never said read the bill at length just because we wanted to drag it out and delay it, because inevitably you have to deal with the issue. All of it reflects a lack of respect for the institution, the process, and the whole purpose of governing which is to support the people of the state of Colorado. And that troubles me.
Well, after the heat of the first week, and there was plenty of it in the legislature, I think they're still a little frozen after the Martin Luther King deep freeze. They're a little chill this week, but we still see the ramifications of what happened that first week. Certainly the State of the State speech, we have the concern about Polis not mentioning migrants. You also have Polis having put out the emergency declaration because of the cold coming, talking about shelters and other things where rural lawmakers and other rural residents were offended because they once again feel that they are being left out. And that has been a recurring theme dating from wolves and other issues, and it's going to keep popping up in this legislative session. The issue of taxes, which was fascinating in the State of the State, when Polis said our taxes are too high, we should be cutting them. So that was certainly not something the rest of the Democratic Party thought they would hear during the State of the State. He got some applause from unlikely places, the right. So it's going to be a very interesting session, but this week is kind of chill, but the same themes. People are not being civil. We're going to have to deal with affordable housing. We will keep hearing that through the session.
Mm-hmm. Even before Donald Trump walked away from the Iowa caucuses with a victory on Tuesday night, the Colorado GOP went ahead, Eric, and endorsed Donald Trump ahead of our primary here in Colorado in March.
The level of hypocrisy in this party is really just stunning. You have Lauren Boebert, who keeps talking about the swamp in Washington, but now is moving across the state to a new congressional district to try to carpetbag there in order to stay part of the swamp that she so laments. And then you got Dave Williams, or as I call him, I really, really, really badly need a paycheck, Dave Williams, who is using all the power, such as it is, of being the state party chair to try to load the dice in his favor in terms of his run for Congress down in Colorado Springs in Congressional District 5. The level of lunacy, I think you can trace, it goes to Iowa as well. If you look at polls of people who attended these caucuses, 65% of caucus attendees regard Joe Biden as an illegitimate president. Not as a bad president or a failed president or any of the rest, which is fair discussion, but as an illegitimate president. And if you take the number of those caucus attendees who caucused for Trump, that 65% number becomes 90%. It's crazy land.
Pennfield.
We've been talking about sort of the dysfunction of the political and government system, and this just further illustrates it. You've got a party that's already fractured to begin with. We have a primary in our state, but the party has decided to endorse one of the candidates who's going to be involved in the primary, who didn't win the primary before. I think Ted Cruz won the Republican primary the last time it was done. And I don't understand the state party doing this and preempting their own primary. And I will finally add, one of our colleagues here and the former majority leader I served with, Norma Anderson, are Republicans who have finally said enough is enough, and they're challenging President Trump's right to be on the ballot under the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and the U.S. Supreme Court is going to take that up. That's what we need, is people with good intentions and a commitment to our system of government to say enough's enough.
His name will be on the ballot. And I'm curious, didn't you have to, if you're a Republican candidate, pay the party like $40,000 to get on the Colorado ballot? So now...
Shouldn't they get refunds?
It's the only money coming into that party.
Yeah. Patty, your thoughts?
In addition to civility, which political figures need a lesson in, how about a lesson in conflicts of interest? Dave Williams, let go Brandon is what we should call him now. Dave Williams has no business running in the 5th and running in the Colorado Republican Party. At least when Ken Buck was a candidate, he was unopposed when he ran the party. So that's a huge conflict of interest. It just shows how bereft this small group that runs the Colorado Republican Party is of morals. And let's also point out, if indeed their chosen candidate, is going to win the primary, what happens if the U.S. Supreme Court determines that under Colorado law agrees with Colorado Supreme Court and Donald Trump cannot be on the Colorado ballot? Who wins?
I think everyone loses in this scenario. And because everybody's used up all the really good adjectives like bereft of morality and nut job and the ones that Eric used, I'll go a slightly different route. Every election, sometimes we have people that we want to vote for, and then sometimes there's the whole lesser of two evils thing. In this case, though, the primary, we had three other people. Hutchinson, who's now out. We've got DeSantis and also Haley. And three competent governors in addition to Trump. And none of those governors have ever been indicted, have ever engaged in insurrection, have ever tried to overturn an election, have never been convicted by a jury of assaulting a woman, have never done these things. They're still on that ballot. So why is the Republican Party in this state saying, no, not those guys, not the unindicted crowd. Let's go with this guy instead, and we're going to put our voice behind it. It was clear from the beginning that this was their man, and that they were not interested in facilitating a free and open primary. So all I can say is, Dave, let's go, Brandon Williams, shame on you.
That's what happened when you have people invested in the system who basically only want out of it specific things, and they don't care about anybody else or anything else. Dave Williams knows what he wants, and endorsing Trump is, he feels, going to help him get there. It doesn't matter if he's got a commitment to a party to run the party fairly and equitably and openly. Doesn't matter if he's got an obligation to other candidates of the party who have a right to be heard and considered. He just knows what he wants. And there are too many people now who think that way. And what's really scary is they think it's okay to think that way and behave that way. So long as I'm getting what I want, to heck with everybody else. And that's the real frightening part of all of this. And I think that's why it keeps perpetuating and growing.
Foster care in Colorado is gaining the spotlight with the release of the documentary Rebecoming Me, as well as a report from Common Sense Institute. There's a lot of moving around in these children's lives. And when they're out of the system, quite often their futures are rather bleak. Let's talk about this, starting with you, Penn.
The report was eye-opening and frightening all at the same time. To see that you have on average, 5,200 kids in the foster system, and a number of them age out and others come in. And when you age out, it's when you turn 18, and it's kind of like being pushed out the front door of your house and you're on your own all of a sudden. Only 30% of them are high school graduates, so their ability to be self-sustaining gets impacted. The young ladies who are in the system, once they age out, they're 10 times more likely to become parents than the rest of women in society. And, it's not right. This is a system that we're supporting with tax dollars, and it's failing society, and it's failing all of these kids and all of these people who I would argue we have a responsibility to help at least put them on a path where they can become self-sufficient and successful. When I saw the documentary and heard the story of the one guy who spent 11 days in jail because he was 11 minutes late getting home from a curfew imposed by his foster dad, I'm like, this is nuts. I would dare say a few people around this table probably busted curfew a few times when they were growing up. I never thought my parents would send me to jail for showing up late, but that just shows the degree of dysfunction in the system. So I hope the documentary, I hope the report, and the economic cost of the report in the tens of millions of dollars really prompts the legislature to begin to take some action, or maybe the governor will take a lead on this and begin to say we've got to overhaul this system also.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Patty.
Well, and of course, the shame is what happens even before you get into the dysfunctional foster care system. The legislature is looking at redefining the child abuse, making it more specific. I mean, poverty is one of the things thrown in there. You really need to know what the problems are that you are trying to fix when you send kids into the foster system. But let's also look at making sure every child who is born in Colorado is wanted and that parents can handle them rather than create the chaos that leads to those children going to foster care. When we're coming up with to celebrate the anniversaries of Roe v. Wade, when we're looking at new legislation, new proposals for the ballot regarding choice, let's remember children need to be taken care of from the start. When they are born, they should be wanted, parents should be educated. So the problems are not just in foster care.
Mm-hmm. Krista?
But when we're talking about unwanted children, whether they're unwanted in the womb or unwanted after birth, or whether they're neglected or abused, I would argue that we need to care for all of them. The report found that kids, they maybe been in 4 different high schools, right? There's no stability there. One of the things that the report wanted us to look at is education savings accounts. There are states that have foster care or vouchers for foster care kids so that they may remain at one school the entire time and get the specialized care that a private school can provide. So I think that's one thing to look at. I think also just looking at the model of, is there another way to care for these kids so that they at least have stability, and that through that stability might do better once they're on their feet.
These are human tragedies. There's no way to watch this film, Rebecoming Me, or to read the report from Common Sense Institute with any emotion other than just that of sadness. Yes, there can be anger accompanied it, and hopefully some commitment to fix it and get this system right, but it is all grounded in sadness. Huge hats off to Rachel Farha, who happens to be the producer of this show, Colorado Inside Out on PBS 12, who also was the producer of this movie. Shout out as well to John Farnham and the folks at Common Sense Institute for a very sobering report, but this is not good enough. It's not good enough in any state, and it is certainly not good enough in Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, now it is time to shift and go through the highs and the lows of this week. According to our panel, we'll start on the low note, Patty.
Well, last year, Taste of Colorado, remember you were shocked at this table when I told you it was dead for the year. Taste of Colorado was kind of morphed into Viva Streets, which we just learned is being canceled this year. Let's bring back Taste of Colorado. If you want to bring back downtown, remind people of the fun reasons to go there.
I don't know if the shame of the week should go to Ian Silveri for taking the contract or for the Jeffco commissioners for offering a $360,000 contract to the husband of Congresswoman Peterson to try to de-Bruce the district, that is, take away Tabor refunds from that district. The whole thing is kind of, friends helping friends to screw over taxpayers. So I'm thinking there's some problems on multiple levels.
Our debt, the amount of money we owe to bankers and others, has now surpassed $34 trillion. That's trillion with the T. We are, particularly with higher interest rates as a country, paying $730 billion a year just in servicing that debt, just in interest payments. And we can have discussions, policy discussions about taxing the rich, the ultra rich more. But as was pointed out this week, you could confiscate every dollar owned by the Jeff Bezoses and Mark Zuckerbergs and Mark Cubans and Bill Gateses of the world, and you would not even pay the interest on that debt. This will not end well.
Whoa, that's really depressing. Pennfield.
Didn't we have a president some years ago that eliminated the debt? Okay, I was
The
just
deficit.
That's it. No, just saying. Just remember. House Minority Leader Lynch, who is running for Congress, I think, Krista, based on what you described before, maybe you've got to get some street cred in order to be able to run for office in the party. So running around loaded and strapped with a pistol in your car and not telling people, maybe that's a way to get the street cred so you're a viable congressional candidate.
Lesson learned.
All right, let's end on a positive note.
Well, let's remember, this has been a launching pad for other politicians. Tom Tancredo, Congress.
Krista.
This table straight to Congress. So there you go, Krista.
Come on, Krista.
The end of the National Western Stock Show. It's been a great run. It goes through Sunday. Get out there if you can. And let's see what we can do to make the facilities year-round. And in fact, maybe throw a migrant shelter into the Coliseum the way it was used during COVID, so that we can actually get these people in a place where they will have services.
I don't know how effective they're going to be, but I do appreciate that both the Democrat and Republican leaders in our General Assembly have committed to trying to have better decorum and to keep things civil over the next session. So kudos to them.
Let's hope.
living for the most part these days up in Grand County in the mountains, it's been a wild week up there. The amount of snow which we've received in the last 4 or 5 days, I know Denver had the supreme frigid cold, but the amount of snow we have is really astounding. Berthoud Pass, now open, was closed for the longest time. Kudos to the highway workers who finally got it open amidst that volume of snow, and to all the travelers who took the long way around, and it was an ugly, ugly trip.
You know for sure.
I do know.
It was very cold this week, but I remain heartened that 250 of us showed up for the MLK Parade in below zero temperature. Former State Representative Wilma Webb was there in the cold and spoke and addressed the crowd, as well as a chunk of our congressional delegation. And it sort of lifts your spirits to see that even weather like that won't dampen the enthusiasm of people to come out and celebrate someone who did so much for our country. It was a great MLK Day.
It was great. With all the tough issues and partisanship that started 2024, I want to recognize 4 examples of greatness. I'll be quick. The people who got their shovels out and got those people out of the avalanche at Berthoud Pass who their cars were buried. Number 2, the people like Pennfield who braved the cold on Monday to walk in the MLK Parade. And then also the young kids, the ag kids who are out there at the stock show, worked so hard with their animals, and this week was a big deal for them to show. The last couple weeks, a big deal for showing. And then the Colorado woman who lost her mom to cancer at 17, went to the Air Force Academy, made Dean's List every semester, earned the title of second lieutenant, and then Madison Marsh became the first ever active duty service member to be named Miss America. There is a whole lot of good here in Colorado. We cannot forget that. Thank you, panel, for coming this week. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for you watching at home or listening on our podcast. I'm Kyle Dyer. I will see you next week here on PBS 12.